The Christmas card was still on the refrigerator when I got the text. I had put it up there myself, one of those photo cards my daughter-in-law had printed at Walgreens. The four of them in matching plaid pajamas, my son grinning like he always did when he thought he was doing something right, and me not in the picture because I had taken it. I remember thinking that was fine. Grandmothers take the picture. That's what we do. I'm 67 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Decatur, Georgia, the same house I've owned for 22 years, the same house where my son spent his teenage years eating my cooking and leaving his shoes in the middle of the hallway. My name is Lorinda, and I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am not a dramatic woman. I do not stir up trouble. I do not hold grudges. My mother raised me to be steady, and I have been steady my entire life, through a divorce, through raising my son alone on a teacher's salary, through breast cancer at 53, through the long, quiet years after my son moved away and started his own life. Steady. That is what I've always been. So when I tell you what happened last Thanksgiving, I need you to understand that it shook something loose in me, something I didn't even know was held that tight. It started, the way these things always start, with good intentions. My son has been married to his wife for 6 years. She's from a large family out of Charlotte, and from the beginning, the holidays have been a negotiation. 1 year with her people, 1 year with me, sometimes split down the middle in ways that left everyone exhausted and no one satisfied. I understood. I told him early on, I am not going to be that mother. I will not make you choose. I will not guilt you. You have your own family now, and that is a blessing. And I meant it. What I did not expect was that being flexible would eventually start to feel like being erased. Last spring, my son called me on a Sunday afternoon. He was in a good mood. I could tell by the way he said, "Hey, Mama," before I'd even finished saying hello. He told me his wife's family was planning a big trip to a resort in Hilton Head, South Carolina, for the week of Thanksgiving. A real family gathering. 7 or 8 families, a rented beachfront property, enough rooms for everyone. He was excited. His kids were excited. He said they'd love for me to come. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I should tell you about Hilton Head. I had never been. I'd driven past the signs on I-95 a dozen times over the years, and always thought, someday. It sits on the South Carolina coast, all wide beaches and Spanish moss, and the kind of quiet that feels expensive. It was not the sort of place I took vacations when my son was growing up. Back then, vacation meant a long weekend in Savannah or a road trip to see my sister in Memphis. But now I was retired. I had a little money set aside, nothing extravagant, but enough. And the idea of spending Thanksgiving at the beach, watching my grandchildren run toward the water, felt like something worth spending it on. "How much do you need from me?" I asked him. He said his wife was handling the booking. The rental was going through her sister, who had some kind of connection to the property. He'd let me know. 2 weeks later, he sent me a Venmo request for $4,400. I looked at it for a long moment. That was real money. That was the better part of 2 months of my Social Security check, and I still had my pension from the county school system, so it wasn't going to break me, but it was significant. I thought about it for a day. I called my best friend, Augustina. We have been friends since 1989, since we taught 3rd grade together at the same elementary school, and she said, "Lorinda, if this is something you want to do, then do it. You've earned it." So I sent the money. I marked it on my calendar. I started thinking about what to pack. I bought a new swimsuit, not because I planned to wear it in public, but because grandchildren have a way of pulling you into the water whether you're ready or not, and I wanted to be ready. I told my sister, I told Augustina, I told my neighbor across the street who always waters my plants when I'm gone. I was going to Hilton Head for Thanksgiving. For 6 months, I held that thought like something warm. Now I need to tell you about a Tuesday in October. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I had been to the grocery store, I had watered my garden, I had watched the 6 o'clock news. I was sitting in my kitchen eating leftover chicken and rice when my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my son. I remember I wiped my hands on a dish towel before I picked it up. I don't know why I remember that detail, but I do. The text said, "Hey Mama, so there's something we need to talk about. There's been a change with Thanksgiving. Layla's family has decided they want it to be just her side this year. I know this isn't what we planned. I'm really sorry. You won't be joining us on the trip." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the table and finished my dinner. I don't know why I did that. Maybe because there was nothing else to do. Maybe because the chicken was still warm and something in my body knew that if I started feeling this right then, in the middle of a Tuesday evening, alone in my kitchen, I might not stop for a while. After dinner, I washed my dishes, I dried them, I put them away. Then I sat back down at the table and picked up my phone. I read the text a third time. "You won't be joining us on the trip." Not, "I'm sorry, we have to figure something out." Not, "Let me call you and explain." Not even, "We'll do something special with you another time." Just, "You won't be joining us." I sat with that for a long time. Then I typed back, "What about the $1,400 I sent?" He replied almost immediately, which told me he'd been holding the phone waiting. He said the costs were already allocated, that the booking was non-refundable, that it wasn't personal, just a family dynamics thing, and he hoped I understood. It wasn't personal. I want to sit with that phrase for a moment because I have thought about it nearly every day since October. When you are 67 years old, and you raised a child by yourself, and you worked for 31 years, and you sent your son money, you saved so you could spend a holiday with your grandchildren, and then your son sends you a text message telling you that you won't be joining the trip. It is personal. There is nothing about that sentence that is not personal. The money I sent was personal. The swimsuit folded in my closet was personal. The way I had been telling people for 6 months that I was going to Hilton Head was personal. I did not say any of this in my text back. What I said was, "I understand. Because I am steady. Because that is what I do." But I want to tell you what was happening inside me while I typed those 2 words. There was something shifting. Something quiet and tectonic, the way the earth moves, before anyone on the surface knows anything is wrong. I had spent 67 years being the person who understood, who adjusted, who showed up and asked nothing and said, "I understand," and meant it. And for the first time in a long time, I did not mean it. I called Augustina that night. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does, and before I even finished telling her the story, she said, "Lorinda." Just my name, that one word, in the voice of a woman who has known me for 35 years, said everything. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I didn't know yet. But something was already moving in me, something purposeful and quiet. I told her I'd sleep on it. I did not sleep much. What I thought about in those hours between midnight and 4 in the morning was the account. When my son told me his wife was handling the booking, I had asked if I should pay the resort directly. He said no, send it to him, and he'd get it to his wife's sister who was managing the payments. So that's what I did. I sent it to my son through Venmo. But what my son did not know, what I'm not sure he'd ever thought to ask, was that I had set up that Venmo transfer with a purchase protection request. I'd done it almost automatically, the way you do things when you've been managing your own finances alone for 20 years. I'd flagged it as a payment for services not yet rendered, which kept a small window open for a dispute. I'm not a tech person. I want to be clear about that. But my credit union has a woman named Pamela who sits at the second desk and has helped me navigate every financial decision I've made for the last 15 years. Pamela is practical and plain-spoken and does not waste words. I called her first thing Wednesday morning and explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Let's look at your options." We looked at them together. The short version is this: Because of how I had flagged the transfer, and because the trip had not yet occurred, I had grounds to dispute it. It would take time. It would not be simple, but it was possible to initiate a reversal process for some portion of what I had sent. I told Pamela to start the process. Then I called Augustina back. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Ask. Ask. If I told you I wasn't going to Hilton Head for Thanksgiving, but somewhere else, would you want to come with me?" She laughed, not a small laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere deep. "Lorinda," she said, "where are we going?" I had been thinking about the Outer Banks of North Carolina since about 3 in the morning. It was a place I'd always wanted to see. The wild horses on Corolla Beach, the lighthouse at Cape Hatteras, the way the Sound and the ocean sit on either side of that narrow strip of land like two things that never quite meet. I had looked at rental properties by 7 a.m. There were still openings for Thanksgiving week. Not cheap, but not impossible, especially if we split it. I told Augustina what I was thinking. She said, "Call Dottie." Dottie was our other friend from the school. She taught 4th grade and had retired 2 years before me. She lived in Lithonia now, about 20 minutes from my house. Her husband had passed 3 years ago, and she had been, in the quiet way of a woman who doesn't complain, a little lost. I called Dottie. She cried a little when I told her, not about my situation, about the trip, about being asked. She said she hadn't been to the beach since 2019. So it was 3 of us, Augustina, Dottie, and me, 3 retired school teachers from DeKalb County, booking a 4-bedroom house on the Outer Banks of North Carolina for Thanksgiving week. I found a house in Nags Head, a grey shingled place 3 rows back from the beach, with a big wraparound porch and a hot tub, and a kitchen large enough to cook a real Thanksgiving dinner in. It slept 8, which was more than we needed, but the price was reasonable when we split it 3 ways. And there was something about having extra space that felt like luxury. Like I was not squeezing myself into whatever room was left. Like I was taking up exactly as much space as I wanted. I booked it that afternoon. I did not tell my son. The dispute with the Venmo transfer took longer than I expected. Pamela had warned me it might. In the end, I recovered $800 of the $400. Not everything, but enough. Enough to cover a significant portion of the Nags Head rental. The rest I let go. Some things cost you money and teach you something worth more than money. And I decided that was what the other $600 was. The week before Thanksgiving, my son called. He was in a different mood than when he texted me in October. Less smooth, a little careful. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was doing well. He asked what I was planning for Thanksgiving. I told him I was taking a trip with some friends. A pause. "Oh," he said. "Where?" "North Carolina," I said. "The Outer Banks." Another pause. He knew what the Outer Banks was. We talked about it years ago. He'd had a friend with a family place out there, and he'd come home one summer with stories about the wild horses and the lighthouse. He knew it was not a consolation prize. He knew I had made a choice. "That sounds nice, Mama," he said finally. "It will be," I said. "I want to tell you about Thanksgiving morning on the Outer Banks, because some things deserve to be told slowly." We had driven up on Monday, all 3 of us in Augustina's SUV, which has heated seats and a sunroof and more legroom than my Camry. We stopped in Rocky Mount for lunch and got to Nags Head by late afternoon. When we pulled up to the house, Dottie got out and just stood in the driveway for a minute looking at it. The grey shingles on the porch and the sea oats moving in the November wind. "Lord of mercy," she said quietly to no one in particular. We unpacked. We made a grocery run. That evening we sat on the porch with cups of tea and watched the sky go pink and orange over the Sound side, and no one said very much because sometimes the right thing is just to sit inside the good thing and let it be. Thanksgiving morning I woke up early. That's a habit I developed over 30 years of getting to school before the buses arrived, and retirement has not broken it. I made coffee and took it out to the porch. The ocean was about 3 rows over, and I couldn't quite see it, but I could hear it. That low, patient sound, the water moving towards shore and pulling back, towards shore and pulling back. It does not stop. It does not adjust its schedule for anyone. I thought about my grandchildren waking up in Hilton Head, whatever beachfront property my daughter-in-law's family had rented. I hoped they were having a good morning. I genuinely hoped. The love I have for those children is not something that gets tangled up in whatever is happening between the adults. It doesn't work that way. It lives in a separate place in my chest, and nothing that happened in October touched it. But I also thought, you could have been here, watching your grandmother drink her coffee in the morning quiet. You could have grown up knowing that this is what she is, a woman who finds her way to the good thing, even when the path is not the one she planned. Maybe someday I'll tell them that. We cooked the whole Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey. A 14-pounder that Augustina brined overnight in a cooler she had brought from home, which is exactly the kind of thing Augustina does. I made macaroni and cheese the way my mother taught me, with 4 cheeses and a layer of crushed crackers on top. Dottie made her sweet potato pie, the one her grandmother used to make, and she cried a little while she was peeling the potatoes, and we let her, because Dottie's grandmother and Dottie's husband and Dottie's lost years were all in that kitchen with us, and that's allowed. We ate at 2 in the afternoon with the sliding door open to the porch because it was warm enough, 60 degrees on the Outer Banks in late November, which feels like a gift. We ate too much. We sat at the table for 2 hours after the food was gone, just talking. About the school, about the children we'd taught who were grown now, some with children of their own, about the years before we knew each other, and the years when we didn't know what we had. At some point, Augustina raised her glass of sweet tea and said, "To the women who figure it out, even when it takes a while." I think about that toast a lot now. On Friday, we drove north to Corolla to see the wild horses. They're a herd of colonial Spanish mustangs that have lived on the northern beaches of the Outer Banks for 400 years. They came over with the Spanish explorers, and when the ships left, they stayed. They have no fences. They roam where they want. They have survived hurricanes and droughts and centuries of human presence on their land, and they are still there. We pulled up to a group of 4 of them standing not 50 yards from the road, a mare and a stallion and 2 younger ones. They were not performing. They were not posed. They were just standing in the sand in the November light, existing completely on their own terms. I stood there for a long time. My son called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. I listened to the message later. He said he hoped I was having a good time, that the kids missed me, that he'd like to get together when I was back. His voice had something in it that I recognized, a realization maybe, the particular sound of a person who has started to understand that the people in their life are not permanent fixtures, that they make choices, that they can leave. I texted him back, having a wonderful time. We'll talk when I'm home. I meant it warmly, but I meant it firmly too. On Saturday evening, we sat in the hot tub as the sun went down. The sky was doing something extraordinary. Layers of pink and purple and a deep navy at the top, and the first stars appearing even before the colour was fully gone. Dottie had found a Bluetooth speaker and she put on some Anita Baker, which felt exactly right. We sat in that warm water under that enormous sky, and I thought, I paid for this, not just with money. With 67 years of being the person who adjusted, who understood, who made room, this is what I paid for. I was not angry anymore. I want to be clear about that. What I was done. Not done with my son. I love my son, and love is not something I turn off like a faucet. But done with the version of myself that sent $400 and said I understand in the same month. Done with making myself small enough to fit into whatever space was offered. Done waiting to be included in things I could simply choose for myself. When I got home to Decatur, I unpacked my bag and washed my clothes and watered my plants. Then I sat down and wrote my son a letter. Not a text, an actual letter, on paper, the way I used to write when words mattered enough to slow down for. I told him that I loved him. I told him that I was not going to pretend the October text hadn't happened, because pretending is a habit I was giving up. I told him that I understood he was in a complicated position with his wife's family, and that I had compassion for that, and that I also needed him to understand something. I was not an afterthought. I was not an optional guest. I was his mother, and I had earned the right to be treated with the same consideration he would give anyone else he loved. I told him that going forward, I would be making my own plans, that if he wanted me to be part of his family's celebrations, I would need to be invited in a way that felt like an invitation, and not an accommodation. I told him I had spent a wonderful Thanksgiving at the Outer Banks with women who had chosen me, and that I intended to go on choosing to be somewhere I was genuinely wanted. I sealed the envelope and put a stamp on it. First class. None of that priority mail urgency. This was a letter that could arrive in its own time. He called me 3 days later. He had read it. I could tell by his voice, quieter than usual, more careful. He said he was sorry. Not a quick sorry, the kind you say to move past something. A slower one, with a pause in the middle of it. He said he hadn't thought about how it would feel. That he'd been so focused on managing his wife's expectations and not starting a fight, that he had made a decision without really thinking through what it would cost me. He said he knew that wasn't a good enough reason. He said the thing about the money made him feel sick when he really sat with it. I listened. I did not rush to tell him it was fine, because it was not entirely fine yet, but I told him I appreciated him saying it. I told him we would find our way through this because we were family, and family is what you find your way through things with. I want you to meet us somewhere for Christmas, he said. Wherever you want. Just you and me and the kids. No big group, just us. I told him I'd think about it. I've been thinking about it. I haven't decided yet. Not because I'm punishing him, that is not what this is, but because I am taking my time now. I am sitting with things. I am not rushing to reassure anyone. Augustina called last week to ask if I wanted to start planning for next Thanksgiving. She had heard about a house rental program in the Smoky Mountains, a big cabin with a fireplace and a wraparound porch and enough bedrooms for 6 or 8. She thought we could invite a few more people, make it a real gathering. I told her yes. Put me on the list. I am 67 years old. I have been steady my whole life, and I intend to stay that way. But steady doesn't mean still. It doesn't mean fixed in place, waiting to be included. It means knowing where your feet are, even when the ground shifts. It means booking the house on the water when the invitation doesn't come. It means 3 retired schoolteachers in a heated hot tub, watching the stars come out over the Outer Banks, while Anita Baker plays from a Bluetooth speaker, and the Atlantic Ocean does what it has always done, keeps moving, keeps coming to shore, entirely on its own terms. That is what steady looks like, when you finally let it. There's a moment I keep coming back to, standing on that road in Corolla, watching those 4 wild horses in the November light. They weren't performing for anyone. They weren't waiting to be invited somewhere. They had simply been doing what they were built to do for 400 years, through every storm that tried to move them. I think about what it cost me to get to that road. Not just the money, though the money was real, and the recovery of it required me to be smarter than I had been in October, to know my own paperwork, to make the call to Pamela before I made any emotional decisions. That is something I want to say plainly. Being wise about your own finances, knowing what protections you have, not sending money and hoping for the best, that is not a cold thing. That is a form of self-respect. Lorinda from 2 years ago would have written off the entire $1,400 as the price of keeping the peace. Lorinda, standing in that driveway in Nag's Head, had learned that keeping the peace at the cost of your own dignity is not peace at all. It is just silence with a smile on it. What it really cost me was something I had been spending my whole life without noticing. The assumption that if I was good enough, patient enough, flexible enough, the people I loved would eventually show up for me the way I had shown up for them. I had confused consistency with worthiness. I thought that if I never made demands, never caused trouble, never asked for much, I was earning something. I was not earning anything. I was just making myself easier to overlook. My son is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He is a man who made a cowardly choice in October and then had the character to sit with a letter from his mother and feel the weight of it. That matters. The fact that he called, that his sorry had a pause in the middle of it, that he could name specifically what he had done wrong, that tells me something about who he is underneath the decision he made. People who cannot grow do not apologize like that. People who have some integrity left in them do. But what I had to learn, what 67 years and a Thanksgiving at the Outer Banks finally made clear to me, is that I cannot wait for other people's growth to decide whether I am going to live well. The life I had in those 5 days in Nags Head, the macaroni and cheese in the hot tub, and Anita Baker and Dottie crying over sweet potato pie, and Augustina raising her glass of sweet tea, none of that required anyone's permission. I built that. I chose that. I called those women and said, "Come with me." And they came, because they were people who had decided long ago to show up for the ones who showed up for them. That is the thing about cause and consequence that no one tells you when you're young. It works in every direction. What you give out, what you accept, what you allow, what you finally decide not to allow anymore. All of it comes back around, not in some mystical way, but in the plainest, most practical way. When I started treating my own time and my own money and my own presence as something worth protecting, people responded to that. My son responded to that. The world has a way of adjusting to what you actually believe about yourself. I am still steady. I will always be steady. But steady, I now understand, is not the same as still. It means you know where your feet are. It means you can be moved and not be swept away. It means that when Augustina calls about a cabin in the Smoky Mountains and asks if I want to be on the list, I say yes without hesitating. Not because I am running from anything, but because I have finally, at 67 years old, decided to run toward.